Now, besides the fantastic story, the amazing character design and gameplay, one of the other better aspects of Wuthering Waves are definitely the graphics and how flexible they are. On PC and on Android, you can change the configuration file, you can customize the configuration file either for quality, maximum quality, or performance. You're pretty much able to do a lot of very interesting things with that. Now, today I will go and probably go with the highest possible quality that we can achieve currently on Android, on mobile in general. And you might be wondering, well, what does that mean? Can you get the PC quality, PC assets on mobile? Well, technically you can, but the developers would have to add them. They would have to add the higher quality assets from PC to mobile. At the moment, you can get the game to look really good, and you can still enable some of the unused assets that is available on mobile, but you can't really take the exact PC look because the physical assets that are required are not in the mobile version of the game. Now, is that is that something bad or anything like that? Well, to me it's a little bit disappointing because these phones can definitely handle the game in a much more higher quality. I mean, I usually play the game in 4K and I'm still not able to max out the GPU on this thing. So there is still a lot of room for more quality improvements from Kuro themselves, for them to add the more higher quality assets. But you can still increase the resolution. Primarily increasing the resolution makes the game look much nicer. Lighting can also be improved, shadows can massively be improved, reflections can be massively improved, and a lot of other interesting things like that. And today I will actually do a little comparison between the default visuals, default config and default graphics, and the custom config graphics. Now I have to mention something right away. This config that I'll use today is focused on maximum quality. I did not cut any corners to save performance. Everything is as high as it can get. Either the highest limit by the engine or the highest limit that the game supports. Which means that it will be very taxing. And if you plan to use a config like this, I would not recommend that you attempt this config on anything that's not a 8 Gen 3 and above. iPhones can't run this, their GPU is just too slow for it. Only 8 Gen 3 and up, I would say, has the chance to get decent enough performance for such a config. And for the 8 Gen 3, I would even recommend to enable the frame generation if you want the FPS to be close to 60. That's approximately the level of heaviness that this config has, because again, no cutting corners. I didn't cut corners on anything to save on performance, pure quality and just maximum raw performance that this thing will deliver. Now I'm going to be doing the test on a 8 Elite, which is, as we all know, quite the beefy chipset, and honestly I had a very nice experience with it. Probably one of the first mobile chipsets that would be able to handle the PC version of the game just fine and still get over 60 FPS on the maximum graphical options. And I would definitely play the game on the PC version through emulation, but unfortunately I can't do that because the game's anti-cheat will just yeet the game right into the login, or not login, it will just shut off the game. So you can't emulate the game through emulation, at least not at the moment, but the Valve is working on something more official, so I'm fairly sure once Valve has their own mobile Steam or something along those lines of getting PC gaming on Android, they're working on something like that. I believe then the PC version of this game will be playable without the anti-cheat eating it off. Definitely very interesting times are ahead. So First, I will do a comparison with video. There will be video side by side, and then we will take screenshots, still images of certain scenes, and then we will kind of take a closer look of what's been happening. So first, on the left side, it's the default configuration. On the right side, it is the custom one. Both will be running obviously on the maximum settings, and you will notice quite a lot of the primary difference that most of you will probably notice is the heat output and the GPU load. The GPU is working a lot harder when the game is in a custom config, nearing like 80% total load, which is quite the effort actually to achieve on the 8 Elite. Other thing, the draw distance, the resolution, the lighting. I would say the lighting and the overall light effects and the reflections are probably the most notable changes. Shadows are also the shadow resolution has been massively improved, and overall the shadows and reflections in this game would be the most taxing. You'll notice that when you go and near a reflective surface, primarily water I would say, and when you look at the GPU clock speed, it will just go crazy when you zoom into the water, as it should. Now I'm not exactly sure if that's like a ray tracing effect going on. I don't know if that is enabled. Some say this, some say it's not. From my experience, even though I have ray tracing commands and lines on the custom configuration file, I don't really see much of a difference about that aspect of the game. So I don't know, maybe it is enabled, maybe not. From my experience, I would say it's not. But in any case, speaking of reflections, now there is quite the visual difference between both screens here. I will actually go and put the same time so that the overall time of the day doesn't really interfere with anything. I will go at set 9 on both, and then we will take a look at the overall lighting, and I mean there's a huge difference already that we see between the configuration files. The reflections and overall, I mean the reflections definitely look much better, even the light itself, so could potentially have some form of like ray tracing effect, but again I'm not entirely sure about that. Didn't really inspect that too much. Overall, on the right side the game just looks much nicer, I would say, both sharper and both with having a lot of extra effects added to it, with a bit of extra GPU load, but honestly it is to be expected. After all, as I said, I didn't want to cut any corners for performance, so it's designed to be as taxing as possible because it is designed to look as good as possible. And this is the config that I usually use when I test things out, because that's one way to actually properly test out a phone, because the default config is not going to stress out the GPU or CPU on the 8 Elite. It's far from it, actually. Very difficult to stress the 8 Elite. Now, second map, we are on Septimon, and this is where you will probably notice the largest difference. Grass draw distance and render distance on the grass. On the default config, you can't really see the distant grass or distant shadows and distant object. Their LODs get definitely simplified a lot, and they even disappear. On the custom config, because it's set to be infinite draw distance basically, and infinite grass visibility and all that comes along with it, you can see the grass from a very long distance, and you can also spot detailed shadows and trees and other objects from a very long distance. And speaking of other things that you may or may not notice, reflections from the little puddles, from muddy areas. On the default config, in most areas you will not have the global reflections on water, on puddles and stuff like that. On the custom configuration file, once enabled, you can actually get some pretty decent reflections. Same area, as you can see on the right side, the tree over there is being reflected. The Jesus, if you look at the water from a certain angle, you can see some Easter eggs, let's call it that. You can also see the sky, the objects around everything. Cheese is also being reflected really well, and the building over there also being reflected. Same thing can be said about this little puddle here. So overall, all the reflections are definitely properly being rendered, and besides that, extra grass density, extra effects, wind effects and all that is also enabled. And some of the smaller things that most players probably will not notice, but you know, they are enabled, which are usually missing on the default config of the game. Now next we will go to this little area. Now this particular place can look very beautiful. I mean, it is very beautiful, and here you will notice later, I think in the pictures it will be more noticeable, but overall the lighting, I'd say, is definitely much better. Of course, depends on the time of day. I think I did pick the same time of day here as well, but the grass, tree, the decoration on the wall there and the background is much more sharper and in a higher material quality on the custom configuration file. So let's do a bit of combat. How will such a config perform in combat? Well, I mean, but first, before we go there, in this area you can see the reflections again are missing on the default config, while the reflections quality and the overall material quality look a lot sharper, a lot better on the custom one. I mean, the material of the puddle here is just really detailed on the custom configuration. When it comes to combat performance, this is where a lot of heat will be generated, to be expected though, because again, higher resolution, higher detail, boosted effects, and other things that I just went crazy on. Looks in combat flashier and I would say nicer. Performance is still 60 FPS as expected from the 8 Elite. So on the new generation chipsets this is not going to be a problem. On the last generation, I unfortunately don't have an 8 Gen 2 or 8 Gen 3. I have an 8 Gen 2 which is older than the 8 Gen 3, but the performance I don't really expect to be that good on the older generations, at least with the custom configuration that I have on the right side. And again, some extra reflections are seen. Honestly, looks in this particular area looks much better on the custom configuration part of the skin. Now let's go to this little area. Honestly, here the only difference that you'll probably notice is the higher resolution and overall sharper image. This was going to be more noticeable on the image part that I will go. But before the little update lately that we had a couple days ago, the reflections haven't been rendered here, and in this case both the reflections of the portal are being rendered, which isn't really can be said about other areas of the game. In some areas of the game the reflections are being rendered, in some areas of the game they're not being rendered, at least on the default config. On the custom one the reflections are being rendered pretty much everywhere, as it's been designed to do. I mean, once you enable it, the game has to listen to the values that you put in. So that was the video part of the little test. The difference is quite significant, but at the same time the performance difference is also very significant and very noticeable. So, what is the next part going to be? Well, we will be taking a look at some. We'll take a look at some images that that I did promise that we will do. But before we go to that, how to install the custom config? Well, there's a lot of them available online. You can find one of these configuration files online, and what I usually like to do, I like to save them, and then I just copy the inside commands from device profile in it, then I go and go into the game game location, game files. I open the device profile and then I just copy paste. I basically just copy paste this. You can also do a replacement, delete the old one and just copy the new one in. That's also a valuable thing to do. But from my experience, I find the game to be more stable and overall does listen to commands more. I guess in a better way. If you copy and paste the commands from the downloaded config to the config that the game created upon installation. From my experience, this seems to be overall the most efficient, the most working way. And once you just copy it, you save it, and upon next boot, the game will apply the custom options that you have put into the configuration files. And once you do that, just turn on the game, and it should automatically go and load them in, and you should immediately notice a huge difference in the overall visual quality. If there is no difference, then there is a little mistake in the code. There's a little mistake, maybe a typo or something can happen. So if that happens, double check everything to see if there isn't anything that's improperly spelled, or if there's a dot where it shouldn't be. Small typos like that do create some headaches in some cases, especially if you're doing this for the very first time. It can be pretty confusing if it doesn't work from the first try. That's why I'm saying copy and paste is the way to go, because if you do that, it usually will just work because there shouldn't be any typos there. So, and as I said, once you do that, here you go. Immediately a much nicer looking game, which I believe is the way to play the game on a higher end device. If you want quality, then this is definitely the way to go. But first, actually second or third, let's take a look at some of the images. So the first image, this is on the left side, default one. On the right side is actually should be the other way around. No, it's not. Okay. As you can see, the character model is definitely much sharper. The background details, the lighting, I would say the lighting has a huge difference. And maybe that's the ray tracing, maybe not. I mean, even the shadows seem to be appearing in some ways where they didn't appear on the default config. This is around the Sakura tree, also a big difference in the resolution. The resolution is one of the larger differences, I would say. The character model, the tree and everything simply looks much sharper and clearer on the custom configuration file. The character model itself looks less blurry. Here you can take a look at her face up on the upper portion of the screen. Much sharper and a lot higher details. And on the bottom part you can see some of the background details as well. Water and reflections. Note here you can actually see the reflections on both. However, the custom config will have the advantage in the high resolution, and the overall depth and the distant objects look a lot sharper and clearer. It is actually noticeable, even on a smaller display. That is indeed very noticeable. Texts and other objects will also look much better. Here we have 3 images. On the left side default, the 2 on the right are with the custom configuration from various distances. And yeah, you can pretty much see the sharpness is much better. The water seems to be better as well, depending on the angle though. So maybe I haven't really done a good job on taking screenshots here. But another little example between the settings here, the grass and everything just looks sharper and more detailed, but primarily less blurry. The blur can be annoying. I personally really dislike blur. I aim for the sharpest possible image, and sharpness is something that a lot of games don't have nowadays, including Wuthering Waves. So if you want sharpness, you really do have to go and change that a little bit. Now, the most obvious difference is in the lighting. Lighting is much better with the custom configuration, and the other huge difference, if you look at distant objects, grass is missing from the default one, and that tree doesn't have shadows, while on the custom config you can see a lot of other objects in the distance in a much more clearer and higher resolution. Once we zoom in though, it's going to become a lot more obvious. This does cost some performance, primarily memory. This config will eat a lot of memory, 7 to 8 gigabytes of memory consumed by this config, which is pretty close to what we see on the PC version of the game, which does eat approximately about the same, although in my case it does eat that much because of the resolution, and the game just needs a lot more memory to as VRAM basically, because it's shared memory, so it will borrow RAM for that purpose as well. But yeah, over here you will notice when you look at distant objects, this is where the difference will be most noticeable. Lighting, I'm not really sure about the lighting. You can kind of see shadows on both, but here a more zoomed in image of the far distant objects. The tree and grasses there, the shadows are in a much higher resolution. Actually, the shadows look really good at this distance. Even at this distance, you can differentiate the shadows really well. While the shadows on the default config look pretty much just like, well, I mean, like spotlight, like a darker spotlight, I guess. And they've done that to save on performance. But this is one of the things that doesn't really, on the default config at least, it wouldn't really affect that much. It should be an optional thing to increase on our own, because again, stuff like this, as we can see here, does make the game look much nicer in general. And other things that make things look nicer are reflections. Here you can take a look at the screenshots from the same area. On top default, on the bottom custom. The reflections are much, I mean, there is no reflections on anything on the default config basically. You can kind of see light, but you can't really see the reflections of the buildings or the tree and stuff like that, or on the Easter egg. But on the bottom config, on the custom config, you can pretty much see reflections in a very high resolution. You can actually increase the resolution of the reflections if you want. I did set the maximum possible resolution. I think it's 8192. That's the highest resolution by the engine, and it does eat a lot of GPU, and also does eat a lot of RAM as well. So this is one of the more taxing commands. And a little bit of a zoomed in image of the reflective surface. Again, much better. Even the textures are also improved. Now on the other map here, you can, on first look, admittedly it does look a bit the same, but once you start to zoom in, you will notice that the custom config does look overall much sharper. The shadows and all that seem to be also, and they should be much better because again of the higher resolution that the shadows have as well. Inside of the tasset field, here the main difference will be in the grass, but at the same time the other big difference will be in the ground. The custom config, because of the material quality level being increased, You do get some better material here, at the same time also better reflections, and overall the muddy part or the watery part seems to be also much better. And now near the ends, no, here actually they look pretty similar, but the difference will be in the overall sharpness and visual quality of the model, of the backgrounds, and of the portal. The portal looks really damn good on the custom configuration file here. Surprisingly though, again, the reflections are present in both in this case. The reflections on the custom config should be in a higher quality, in a higher resolution, but overall still looks really good. If you want, I think most players will probably go for that extra sharpness, and honestly I'm also in that club. Sharpness definitely makes things look a lot better, and here you have the portal up close on both. Yeah, the default one blurry, the custom one is super sharp as it should be. Now, one of the other tricks that you can do to make the game look overall nicer is to play around with the global filter. Now the global filter is actually a very nice addition to the game. I actually started to use it. I'll actually show you what I like to do, what I like to set with the global filter, because it does make the game look generally even nicer, depending on, I guess, player preference. And this is kind of a more subjective thing, because some might prefer the game darker, some might prefer the game brighter. I just want to make the game look nicer in general, so I'll just show you what I like to do. You know, on the color palette, you know, I like to go either bottom right or upper right. Somehow I find the colors to be the most pleasing to the eye, and combining that with the high resolution image and overall high resolution rendering that we have here, it does make things look nice. Now sharpness, this is also a thing I like. Makes the image all nice and sharp. Don't over sharpen though, just make a balance between brightness. This is also one thing that I like to keep sometimes high, sometimes low. Contrasts higher on a higher spectrum can deliver some very nice scenic images depending on the time of the day. Saturation, I do like little on the higher end when it comes to saturation. Grayscale does make the overall image a little bit brighter. I like to keep that slightly up. Shadows, now this is a very interesting one, because I can decide if I want up or down. I decide to go on the lower end. Does seem to give the game, I guess, does make the game look in nice in its own way, depending on, again, player preference. Bloom can actually make a difference depending on the scene, and you also have the film grain, which does sometimes make the game overall look sharper and makes the details look nicer. So the primary thing is probably the sharpness, the grain, and maybe even the overall brightness, but a combination of all is what I would recommend. Find what you prefer, or find what you think looks the best. This is what I personally like. This is what I like to have my game look like. And overall, depending on the time of the day, it does create some very scenic and kind of a dream-like scenes. And yeah, looks already much better. At least for me, it looks much better than what we have seen before. And you can kind of see all different reflections, lights and all that reflecting, and even interacting with the object itself. So depending on the global filter level, you can actually see some of the things that usually are hidden. So the global filter will make the game, if you take correct settings, it will make the game look nicer, because all the other hidden details will pop out. Now let's go and take a look at some reflections real quick. I think a ideal example of some good reflections will be right here at the very start of the game. I mean, this city right here. Overall, the game still has a lot of room open, a lot of room for some graphical improvements on mobile. Good thing is you can do stuff like this on Android, so you are pretty much free to use whatever settings that you like, settings that you want. You are not going to be limited by the developer, you know, telling you what you can and what you can't use. You can enhance the graphics if you want. And yeah, this looks beautiful. I mean, this definitely looks beautiful. Maybe the bloom can be lowered a little bit, you know. Maybe that's something players wouldn't really like to see. But honestly, I do like how the game looks the way it is right now. Nice and sharp, nice and reflective, nice and highly detailed. And the character model looks also pretty stunning. They did a fantastic. This is probably the best character model that they've made so far. They definitely know how to respect the source material, I guess. They went with this specific look and they pull it off really well. Cannot wait to see how 3.0 will look. But yeah, this was the custom config, the default versus custom config for maximum quality. I'll definitely do updates on this as time goes on, because I really want to see what other things we will see into the game. I'm very curious to see what other graphical improvements we will see in 3.0. But overall, if you want to use a custom config to make the game look nicer, to, you know, or to make the game run better, depending on what you want to do with the game actually, you can. So far I've been using this specific configuration for I think over a year. Since 1.3 1.4 I've been using custom configs, and I've been actively using them and basically playing and recording the game with them. So far no issues, and so far I've been enjoying the game quite a lot. And well, with that being said, hope you guys enjoyed. If you want to support me, if you want to see more tests like these, or more configs that you want me to test out, then feel free to like and subscribe. And well, with that being said, stay safe. As always, I'll see you next time.